My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old and I work as a graphic designer. My life is simple and predictable. I wake up at the same time every morning, take the same route to work, and stop by the same coffee shop before heading to the office. It's a routine I've built over the years, a rhythm that keeps everything in place. I like it that way, steady, uncomplicated. I've never been the kind of person who chases after excitement. I prefer structure, knowing what's ahead. Maybe that's why I've been single for so long. Relationships? They're unpredictable, messy. And after everything I've been through, I've learned that it's easier to be on my own. But sometimes, life doesn't ask for permission before it changes. That morning felt like any other. I stood in line at the coffee shop, scrolling through emails, waiting for my turn to order. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, familiar and comforting. The quiet hum of conversation surrounded me, but I wasn't paying attention. My mind was already on the day ahead, deadlines, meetings, tasks waiting to be done. Then I heard a voice. "Excuse me." I looked up, expecting just another person rushing through their morning, but when I turned, I saw him. A man standing behind me. Tall, well-dressed, with sharp features and a quiet confidence. He had an easy posture, like he belonged anywhere he went, but it was his eyes that caught me, steady, observant, like he saw more than he let on. "You dropped this," he said, holding out a pen. I glanced down, realizing I hadn't even noticed it fall from my bag. It was just a simple black pen, but it was one I always carried. I took it from him. "Oh, thanks. That should have been it." A brief exchange forgotten by lunchtime. But something about him lingered. "You come here often?" he asked. His voice was casual and smooth, like we had known each other for longer than a few seconds. I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wasn't sure why he was asking. "Almost every morning," I said. He nodded as if he already knew. "Me too," he said. "I'm Ryan." At first, I thought it was just small talk, just another person being polite. But as I walked out of the cafe that morning, I caught myself thinking about him. The next morning, I saw him again. And the morning after that. It started with simple conversations, light and effortless. Nothing deep, nothing too personal, just morning chatter while we waited for our orders. He asked about my work, about my coffee preferences. He noticed little things, the way I always checked my phone but never seemed in a hurry, the fact that I never ordered pastries. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was just friendly. But there was something about him, something different. He didn't try too hard. He wasn't overly charming and wasn't in a rush to impress. He was just there. And I started to like that. One morning, he surprised me. "Let me get your coffee today," he said, handing his card to the cashier before I could react. I frowned. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said, smiling, "but I want to." It was such a small thing, but it caught me off guard. Not because no one had ever bought me coffee before, but because of the way he did it. Effortlessly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe that was when it started. I told myself I wasn't looking for anything. I was happy on my own. I had my career, my stability, my peace. But Ryan made me question that. He made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, I had been protecting myself for too long. Had I been too cautious? Had I been avoiding something just because it felt safer that way? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, I was curious. Curiosity is dangerous. I started noticing the way he looked at me, the way he leaned in slightly when I spoke, the way he listened, not just politely, but like he actually wanted to understand, the way even the smallest moments with him felt like they mattered. Was it just politeness, or was it something more? More importantly, was I ready for it? Because trust is fragile. Once broken, it's hard to rebuild, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to take that risk again. But fate doesn't wait. One evening, after work, I found myself walking past the coffee shop. I wasn't planning to stop, but then I saw him. He was standing outside, scrolling through his phone. As I walked past, he looked up. "Hey," he said, smiling. "Busy?" I hesitated for only a second. "No," I said. And just like that, my life took a turn I never saw coming. A turn that, months later, I would wish I had never taken. The invitation came casually, like it wasn't a big deal. "Let's have dinner sometime," Ryan had said, his tone light, effortless, like he was just suggesting coffee instead of a real date. And yet, it felt like a big deal to me. It had been a long time since I'd been on a real date, A night out with someone who wasn't just a friend, someone who actually wanted to know me, someone I wasn't meeting out of obligation. I hesitated for a moment before saying yes. Great, he said. Saturday night, I nodded, trying not to let my nerves show. But as the days passed, I found myself thinking about it more than I expected. What would we talk about? Would it feel the same outside of the coffee shop, outside of the familiar rhythm we had fallen into? Would I still feel that ease, that quiet pull toward him? Or would this be the moment I realized I had misread everything? Saturday came faster than I thought. I stood in front of my mirror, staring at my reflection. A simple black dress, understated jewelry. Nothing too much, nothing too little. But still, I adjusted my hair for the third time, as if the right angle would settle the unease in my stomach. Why was I so nervous? I told myself it was just dinner. Just one night. But deep down I knew it was more than that. It was a risk. A small one, maybe, but a risk nonetheless. Ryan picked me up at 7. The moment I stepped outside, I saw him leaning against his car, looking at his phone. When he noticed me, he put it away immediately, a small smile forming on his lips. "You look nice," he said. So did he. But I didn't say it out loud. We drove to a quiet little restaurant downtown. Not too fancy, not too casual, just the right balance. The kind of place that made you feel comfortable the moment you stepped inside. As we sat down, I noticed something. He wasn't rushing. Most men on first dates, at least the ones I had known, talked too much. They filled the space with stories, achievements, and half-boasts disguised as casual conversation. But Ryan, he just sat there, completely at ease, like he had nowhere else to be but here. And that put me at ease too. He asked about my work, but not just to be polite. He wanted details, what I loved about it, what frustrated me. He listened, really listened. And when he spoke, he wasn't trying to impress me. He just talked. Honestly, naturally, about cases he had worked on and people he had met, about how much he loved the law, but how sometimes it exhausted him. And I found myself liking him, not just because he was charming, not just because he was good-looking, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could just be myself. There were no awkward silences, no forced small talk, just an easy, steady flow of conversation like we had done this 100 times before. At one point, he leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I nodded. "Why are you single?" It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard. I could have said a lot of things, that I had been too busy, that I hadn't met the right person. I was just waiting for something to feel right, but none of those were entirely true. So I told him the truth. I guess I stopped believing in it. His expression didn't change. He didn't look surprised. He just waited, giving me space to continue. I sighed, looking down at my glass. "I've seen too many relationships fall apart," I said. "People promise things they can't keep. They say they'll stay, but they don't. And after a while, it just felt easier to be alone." For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he smiled, soft, understanding. "That makes sense," he said. "But you know what I think?" I looked at him. "I think love isn't about promises," he said. "It's about showing up, every day, choosing someone, even when it's hard." I didn't know how to respond to that, because deep down, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love could be that simple, that trust could be rebuilt, that people could mean what they say. But trust is fragile. Once broken, it's hard to fix, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to take that risk again. But that night, as we left the restaurant, as he walked me to my door and said, "I had a great time," I found myself thinking, maybe, just this once, I could believe in it again. It had been weeks since our first date. Everything felt natural and effortless. Mornings at the coffee shop, evening walks when time allowed, conversations that stretched long past midnight. There was no rush, no need for overthinking. For the first time in a long time, I let myself enjoy the presence of someone else. Ryan made it easy. He always seemed to know the right thing to say, the right way to make me laugh. He never pushed too hard, and never asked for more than I was willing to give. And maybe that's why I started to trust him. Maybe that's why I ignored the small voice in the back of my mind telling me to be careful. That night, he took me to a restaurant I had never been to before. A quiet, intimate place tucked away from the city's noise. It wasn't extravagant, but it had a charm of its own. Dim lighting, soft music, the kind of place where conversations felt heavier, more meaningful. Ryan had already arrived when I walked in, standing as I approached the table. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice warm, familiar. I smiled. "You always say that, because it's always true." Dinner was slow and unhurried. We talked about everything: his work, my latest projects, the places we wanted to visit someday. There were no awkward pauses, no forced topics, just two people enjoying each other's company. And yet, something felt off. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. It was just a faint sensation, a quiet discomfort that I tried to push away. But then I felt it, eyes on me, watching. I glanced around, scanning the restaurant, and that's when I saw her. A woman, sitting alone, a few tables away. She wasn't just looking at me, she was studying me. Dark eyes, intense, unmoving, the kind of gaze that made your stomach twist, even when you didn't know why. Ryan was mid-sentence when I turned back to him, forcing myself to stay focused. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing my distraction. "Yeah," I said quickly. "Just thought I saw someone I knew." He didn't turn around, didn't even seem curious. He just nodded and kept talking. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Why was she looking at me like that? I tried to ignore it, tried to keep my attention on Ryan, on the conversation. But just when I was beginning to relax, she stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. And then, without breaking eye contact, she started walking toward me. My body tensed. She stopped beside our table, leaned in just enough that only I could hear, and whispered 4 words. "Be careful with him." And then she was gone. My heart pounded. I turned to watch her leave, but by the time I did, she had already disappeared through the restaurant doors. "Be careful with him." 4 words, simple, direct, a warning. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "What was that about?" I swallowed, forcing a small laugh. "No idea." But that was a lie, because I did have an idea. A past, a story, something left behind that had just resurfaced. I should have asked him. I should have looked him in the eye and demanded an explanation. But instead, I let it go. I let him change the subject and let the night go on as if nothing had happened. And for a while, I convinced myself it didn't matter. But warnings don't just disappear. They wait. And sooner or later, they always come back. The night continued, but I wasn't fully present anymore. I laughed at his jokes and responded when necessary, but my mind kept replaying that moment. The way she looked at me, the way she said those words was like a fact, not a warning. Like she knew something I didn't. I barely touched my food after that. Ryan noticed. "You sure you're okay?" "Yeah," I lied. Because what else could I say? That a stranger had walked up to me and told me to be careful of the man sitting across from me? That I suddenly felt uneasy in a place where I had felt comfortable just moments before? That no matter how much I wanted to pretend it didn't mean anything, it did. The drive home was quiet. Ryan talked about something, work, maybe, or a funny story from his past, but my mind wasn't really there. I nodded when appropriate and smiled at the right moments, but my thoughts were somewhere else. By the time we reached my apartment, my heart had settled, but the doubt remained. "Tonight was nice," he said, his voice soft. "Yeah," I said, meaning it. Because despite everything, it had been. For a brief second, he hesitated, like he wanted to say something else. Then he just smiled. "Good night, Claire." I watched his car disappear down the street before turning toward my building. Be careful with him. I told myself it was nothing, that she was just bitter, just someone from his past who couldn't move on. But in the back of my mind, a thought whispered. What if she wasn't? What if she was trying to protect me? I pushed the thought away and went inside. But that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew the feeling wouldn't leave me. At first, I told myself it was nothing. People have pasts. People have exes. Not every warning means something. But I couldn't forget her words. Be careful with him. The more I tried to push them away, the louder they became. A quiet whisper in the back of my mind, a lingering feeling I couldn't shake. Still, I didn't ask Ryan about it. Maybe I didn't want to know the truth. Maybe I was afraid of what I might find. So I convinced myself to let it go. And for a while, things went back to normal, or at least they seemed to. Then the excuses started. It was small at first. A dinner plan was canceled last minute because of a long day at work. A text left unanswered for hours with a simple, "Sorry, got caught up with something." Little things. Things that, on their own, didn't mean much. But then it happened again. And again. One evening, we had plans to meet for dinner. I had picked the place, his favorite restaurant actually. I even texted him earlier in the day, making sure he was still up for it. Of course, can't wait, he had replied. But as I sat at the table, waiting, time kept passing. 10 minutes, 20, 30. I checked my phone. No message. I sent him a text. No reply. I called. It rang. Then voicemail. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I waited, telling myself there had to be a good reason. Maybe he was stuck in traffic. Maybe something came up. An hour passed. Then finally a text. Sorry, something urgent at work. Let's reschedule. That was it. No explanation. No apology beyond that one word. And I told myself not to be upset. I told myself it was just one time. But it wasn't. A week later, it happened again. Another plan, another last-minute cancellation. This time a simple, not feeling great, rain check. The week after that, I didn't even get a message, just silence. And yet, the next morning, he showed up at the coffee shop like nothing had happened. Greeted me with a smile, kissed my cheek, and asked how my day was going. And I let it slide, because when he was with me, he was present, attentive. The same Ryan I had first met, but when he wasn't, it felt like I barely existed. It was like a switch he could turn on and off, and I hated that I noticed it. I hated that I cared. But I did. Then the whispers started, not from my own thoughts this time, from other people. One day a message popped up from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey Claire, I don't know if it's my place to say this, but I heard something about you, about Ryan. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? I replied. A pause. Then, I think he's seeing someone else. I stared at my phone. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't seen the message, to keep living in the space between knowing and not knowing. But I couldn't. Who told you that? I typed back. Her answer made my heart stop. Amanda. A name I hadn't heard in years. A name I hadn't thought about since college. Amanda? I texted. Amanda who? You don't remember? She was in your program. Apparently, she's been telling people you stole her boyfriend. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. Ryan and Amanda? No, it had to be a mistake. I hadn't talked to Amanda in years. We had never been close. Just classmates who ran in the same circles. She couldn't possibly be talking about my Ryan, but deep down I already knew. I knew before I even looked up her name online. Before I clicked on her profile, saw the pictures, and saw his name tagged underneath. Ryan and Amanda. Dating. Or at least, they had been, recently. The dates lined up, the timelines overlapped, and suddenly it all made sense. The last-minute cancellations, the unanswered texts, the moments he disappeared without explanation. I wasn't the only one. I had never been the only one. I sat there, staring at my phone, reading the words over and over again. She's telling people you stole him from her. It felt surreal. Like I had been dropped into someone else's life, someone else's story. And the worst part, people believed her. People from college, people I hadn't spoken to in years, were now whispering about me. I had always been careful. Always stay out of drama, out of mess. But suddenly, I was in the center of it, labeled, judged, a woman who took another woman's man. Except I hadn't. I hadn't known. I should have confronted Ryan. I should have asked for the truth, but I already knew it. And for the first time in weeks, I stopped lying to myself. Ryan wasn't who I thought he was, and I had ignored the warning signs for too long. I stared at my phone, rereading the messages over and over again. My hands felt cold. My chest felt tight. She's telling people you stole him from her. The words blurred together, but their meaning was clear. Amanda believed I had taken Ryan from her, that I had knowingly stepped into her relationship, knowing he wasn't mine to have. But that wasn't true. I hadn't known. I hadn't suspected a thing. And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I should have. The unanswered texts, the last-minute cancellations, the way he was so present one moment and distant the next. It had all been there, right in front of me. I had just refused to see it. I needed to hear it from him. That evening, I called. He picked up on the second ring, his voice light, casual, as if nothing had changed. Hey Claire? He said like he was genuinely happy to hear from me. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Can we talk? He hesitated, just for a second. Of course. What's wrong? Can you come over? Another pause. Then, yeah, give me 30 minutes. I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat on my couch, my thoughts racing. How would he react? Would he deny it? Would he try to twist the story and make Amanda seem like the jealous ex? Would he laugh it off? Pretend it was all a misunderstanding, or would he finally tell me the truth? The knock at my door came sooner than I expected. I took a deep breath, stood up and opened it. He was there, looking the same as always, calm, confident, as if he had no idea what this was about. "Hey," he said, stepping inside. "Everything okay?" I walked toward the kitchen, needing space between us. He followed, leaning against the counter. "So," he said, tilting his head, "what's going on?" I took another breath, gripping the edge of the counter. "I talked to someone today, an old friend." He didn't react, just nodded like he was waiting for me to continue. "She told me something interesting. She said Amanda's been telling people that I stole you from her." Silence. Then the smallest shift, a flicker of something in his eyes. But it was gone too fast to catch. "Amanda," he said finally, his voice neutral. I nodded, waiting. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I was going to tell you." That was all he said. No denial, no outrage, just an admission. My stomach dropped. "So it's true?" He hesitated. "It's complicated." I let out a short laugh, though nothing about this was funny. "Complicated how?" He sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Amanda and we were together for a while, but it wasn't serious. We weren't happy. We both knew it wasn't going anywhere. And yet, she thinks I stole you from her." He shook his head. "She's just bitter. She's trying to make you look bad because she's upset." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that Amanda was the problem, that she was just another jealous ex trying to stir up drama. But the dates didn't lie. The overlapping timelines didn't lie. And the fact that Ryan hadn't told me any of this before, that definitely didn't lie. "Did you ever cheat on her?" I asked, my voice quieter now. He hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. "Ryan." He exhaled. "It's not like that, Claire." "Then tell me what it's like." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I didn't cheat. I wasn't exactly faithful either." The room felt smaller. The air is heavier. I should have walked away then. I should have told him to leave, told him I wanted nothing to do with him. But instead, I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Did you do the same thing to me?" This time, he didn't hesitate. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't think I ever stopped talking to other women. I just didn't see it as a big deal." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Not a big deal?" He shrugged. "I never made promises, Claire. I never said I was perfect, and there it was. The truth." He wasn't sorry. He wasn't regretful. This wasn't some mistake he had made. This was who he was. I stared at him, trying to find the man I thought I knew. The one who made me laugh, who made me feel special, who had, for a brief moment, made me believe in something again. But that man didn't exist. Maybe he never had. I stepped back, crossing my arms over my chest. "I think you should go." For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. "Claire?" "Go." Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe? But he didn't argue. He just nodded, turned, and walked out the door. I didn't move. Not when I heard his car start. Not when I heard the sound of tires fading into the distance. I stood there, staring at the empty space where he had been. And then, finally, I let myself feel it. Not anger, not heartbreak, just disappointment. Not in him, in myself. Because deep down, I had known. I had seen the warning signs, heard the whispers, and felt the shift. And I had ignored them. But not anymore. I sat in silence long after Ryan left. The room felt different without him in it. Emptier somehow, though I knew it wasn't about the space itself. It was the weight of realization settling in, the slow, steady unraveling of everything I had believed about him, about us. The truth had been there all along, scattered in the small details I had chosen to overlook. The missed calls, the vague excuses, the lingering hesitation in his voice whenever I asked him something personal. It was never about being busy. It was never about bad timing, it was always about choices. And Ryan had made his, I should have cried. I should have felt something sharp, something unbearable. But I didn't. Instead, I felt tired, as if my body had finally caught up to what my mind had been trying to tell me for weeks. I had spent so much time trying to convince myself that he was different, that the warmth in his eyes, the easy way he laughed, the careful attention to the little things, it all meant something deeper. But in the end, it didn't. It was just another layer to the person he wanted me to see, not the person he truly was. I wanted to believe that people could change, that if given the right circumstances, the right kind of love, they would become better, stronger, more faithful. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how naive that was. Change isn't something that happens because we wish for it. It isn't something we can force onto someone who isn't ready for it. People don't change unless they want to, and Ryan didn't want to. Days passed and I waited for him to reach out, a text, a call, an explanation. But nothing came. He had walked away without looking back, without a single attempt to fix what was broken. And that told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't lost anything. He hadn't felt the weight of it the way I did. Because for him, I had been just another moment, another fleeting thing that had passed through his life. And now that it was gone, he had already moved on to the next. I thought about confronting Amanda, about telling her that I wasn't the villain in her story, that I had been just as deceived as she was. But what good would that do? The damage was already done. The whispers, the rumors, they were out there, circling through old friends, old acquaintances. Some people would believe me, others wouldn't. And at the end of the day, it didn't change the fact that I had been played. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want an apology. I just wanted to understand why. Why do people do this? Why pretend? Why build something with one hand while tearing it down with the other? Did he ever care at all? Or was it all just a game to him? I thought back to our conversations, the quiet moments in between, the way he had once looked at me and said, "I don't think love is about promises. It's about showing up." It had sounded so honest back then, so real. But now, I saw it for what it was, just words. Beautiful, well-crafted words that held no weight, no meaning. He had never truly been here, not fully, not in the way I had. And maybe that was the difference. I had wanted something real. He had wanted something convenient. I had been searching for something steady. He had been searching for something new. People don't change, not unless they choose to. And Ryan had made his choice long before I ever walked into that coffee shop. It took time, but eventually the ache faded. The questions stopped keeping me up at night. I no longer found myself checking my phone hoping for a message that would never come. Instead, I began focusing on myself again, on the life I had built before him. The things that had once made me happy before he had ever stepped into the picture. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again. One day, weeks later, I saw him. It wasn't planned. I was walking downtown, lost in thought when I glanced across the street and there he was, sitting at an outdoor cafe, leaning in close to someone new, smiling, laughing, saying all the right things, playing the role he had perfected, the same role he had played with me. I could have stopped. I could have walked over, said something, made a scene. But what was the point? She would learn, just like I had. So I turned away, kept walking, and never looked back. I had spent so much time wondering what I did wrong, retracing every conversation, every moment, searching for the exact place where everything shifted. As if understanding it would make it hurt less, as if knowing the reason would change the outcome. But the truth was, it didn't matter. Ryan had made his choice long before I ever realized there was a choice to be made. I wasn't the reason, and I wasn't the exception. He was always going to be this way. I was just the one who had to figure it out the hard way. For days, I went back and forth between anger and disappointment. In some moments, I felt relief. Others, I felt like I had been completely blindsided. I had let him into my life, let myself believe he was different, let myself believe that maybe, this time, it would last. But people like Ryan didn't build things to last. They built things to pass the time. And when it stopped being exciting, they walked away. Or worse, they made you feel like you were the one who had to leave. I told myself I was done, that I wouldn't think about him anymore, that I would erase him from my life just as easily as he had moved on from me. But closure isn't something you decide. It isn't something that happens just because you want it to. Sometimes it's something you have to face, and sometimes it finds you when you least expect it. One evening, as I was walking home, my phone buzzed. A message. From him. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Can we talk?" 3 simple words. I read them over and over, waiting to feel something. Anger, hope, sadness, but I felt nothing. Just exhaustion. I should have ignored it. I should have deleted it without a second thought. But something in me needed to hear what he had to say. Not because I wanted him back, not because I was hoping for an apology, but because I wanted to look him in the eye and finally let go. We met at a park, somewhere neutral, somewhere open. When I saw him, he looked the same, confident, collected, like nothing had happened, like we were just picking up where we left off. It was almost laughable. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, his voice easy, familiar. I didn't smile. Neither was I. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want things to end like this." I tilted my head slightly. "Like what?" "Like we hate each other." I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. "I don't hate you, Ryan. That would require me to care enough to." He winced slightly, but I didn't regret saying it. He had already taken enough from me. My time, my trust, my belief in something real. I wasn't going to let him take my dignity, too. "I know I messed up," he admitted, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I know I should have told you about Amanda from the start, but it wasn't what you think. We weren't together when I met you. Things were already ending." I stared at him, waiting. He was so good at this. At spinning things, at making them sound reasonable. But it didn't change the truth. "So, you just forgot to mention her?" I asked. "Or were you waiting to see if things worked out with me first?" His jaw tensed, and for the first time I saw it. The frustration, the irritation of someone who wasn't used to being questioned. "I didn't think it mattered," he said. "I liked you. I wanted to be with you. And yet, you were still talking to other women." He exhaled sharply. "I told you I never made promises." There it was again, the excuse he always fell back on. As if the absence of a promise made it okay. As if not saying the words out loud meant he hadn't still broken something. I nodded slowly. "You're right, you didn't." He seemed relieved for a second, like I was finally letting it go. But I wasn't done. "You never made promises, but you let me believe you were someone you're not." "Claire," I held up a hand. "No. Listen to me. You didn't lie outright, but you weren't honest either. You let me believe you were capable of something real. And the worst part, you let me believe that I wasn't enough when you got bored." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Maybe, for the first time, he had nothing to say, and that was all I needed. I took a slow breath, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "You don't get to decide how this ends, Ryan." "I do." I stepped back, and this time, I was the one who walked away. I didn't look back, not once. And as I left, I realized something. Closure isn't about getting answers. It isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about understanding that some things don't need fixing. Some people don't deserve another chance. And some doors are meant to stay closed. It had been weeks since I last saw Ryan. Weeks since I walked away without looking back. The weight that had once settled in my chest had started to fade, replaced by something steadier. Peace. Not the kind that comes from getting answers, but the kind that comes from knowing you don't need them anymore. I had spent so much time searching for closure, thinking I needed some final conversation, some explanation to make sense of it all. But now, I understood. Closure isn't something you get from another person. It's something you give yourself. Life went on. I poured myself into work, into small routines that brought me comfort. Waking up early, going for runs before the city fully woke up, sitting in my favorite cafe with a book instead of waiting for someone to meet me. I was learning how to enjoy my own company again, how to fill the silence with something other than thoughts of him. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when I caught myself reaching for my phone, half expecting a message that would never come. Moments when a certain song or scent would bring back something I wasn't ready to remember. But each day, it got a little easier. Then, one evening, I saw him again. It wasn't planned. I had just finished dinner with a friend, walking home through quiet streets lit by the soft glow of streetlights. The city always felt different at night, slower, as if the world was finally catching its breath. I liked the stillness. It gave me time to think, to reflect, without the noise of the day pressing in. But as I turned the corner near my apartment, my steps slowed. A figure stood near the entrance of a bar, half hidden in the shadows. And even before I could fully see his face, I knew, Ryan. He wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, her back to me, leaning in close as he spoke. I should have kept walking. I should have ignored the sharp, sudden tension in my chest. But something about the way he moved, the way his body angled slightly away from her, made me pause. He looked distracted, restless, like he wasn't really there. And then, as if sensing me, he turned. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or something else, something unreadable. He didn't smile, he didn't look away. He just watched me, like he wasn't sure if I was real. The woman beside him said something, but he didn't respond. His attention was locked on me, and suddenly I understood. I had moved on. But he hadn't. Maybe not in the way I once feared, not in the way that meant he still wanted me, but in a way that meant he hadn't expected me to be okay without him. He hadn't expected me to look at him and feel nothing. And for the first time, I realized how little I knew him at all. Because Ryan didn't chase people, he let them chase him. He didn't beg for attention, he expected it to be given. And now, standing there in the cold, I saw what he couldn't say out loud. I wasn't chasing him. And that unsettled him. I took a slow breath and did what I should have done from the start. I turned and walked away. But just as I did, I heard him call my name. I froze. A small part of me wanted to keep going, to pretend I hadn't heard. But another part, the part that had spent so long trying to understand him, needed to know why he stopped me. I turned back. He had stepped away from the woman, his hands shoved into his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked. There was a time when I would have said yes, when I would have searched his face for an answer, hoping to find something I had missed before. But that time had passed. And the fact that he didn't know that only proved how little he had truly seen me. "No," I said, my voice steady. Something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance, frustration, or maybe just confusion. I didn't wait to find out. I turned again, and this time, I didn't stop. I walked home without looking back, the sound of my own footsteps steady against the pavement. And with every step, I felt lighter, stronger. Ryan had always been good at making people feel like they needed him, like they should be grateful for whatever attention he decided to give. But not anymore. Not me. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt the most. It wasn't the lies, the half-truths, or even the realization that I had never really known him. It was that, for a long time, I had convinced myself that his presence was something special, that his attention meant something more than it did. But Ryan wasn't special. He was just another lesson. Another name in a chapter that had already ended. And for the first time, I was finally okay with that. It took time, but eventually, the weight of it all began to lift. The late nights spent replaying conversations, searching for hidden meanings, wondering if I had missed something. Those nights faded into quieter ones. The ache in my chest, the one that made it hard to breathe whenever I thought about him, softened into something manageable. Not gone, but different. Like an old scar that no longer hurts when touched. I had spent so much time trying to understand him, trying to piece together why he had done what he did. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't need to understand him. I only needed to understand myself. I had ignored the signs, the inconsistencies, the half-truths, the way he had always been just out of reach. I had wanted to believe in the version of him that I had created in my head, the one who listened, who made me laugh, who looked at me like I was special. But the truth was, he hadn't really seen me at all. I had been convenient. Someone to fill the spaces between his boredom and his next distraction. And for a while, I let that be enough, but it never should have been. People don't always tell you who they are with words. Sometimes they tell you in the way they make you feel, in the way they show up or don't, in the way they make excuses instead of efforts. Ryan had told me who he was from the start. I just hadn't wanted to listen. But now I was listening, not to him, not to the memories, not to the quiet whispers of regret. I was listening to myself, to the voice that had been drowned out for so long by the need to be wanted, the need to believe that love could fix things. But love isn't about fixing, it's about choosing. And he had never chosen me, not really. So why had I spent so much time choosing him? I thought about that question for a long time, not just about Ryan, but about all the times before him. The people who had come and gone, the ones I had held on to longer than I should have, the ones who had left me feeling like I wasn't enough. It was never about them, it was about me. About what I had been willing to accept, what I had convinced myself was love. But love isn't supposed to feel like waiting. It isn't supposed to feel like wondering if you matter. It isn't supposed to feel like hoping someone will change. One afternoon, I found myself back at the coffee shop where we had first met. The same worn-out wooden tables, the same scent of espresso in the air. For a moment, I wondered if I would see him there, if fate had some cruel sense of humor. But he wasn't there. And even if he had been, it wouldn't have mattered. I wasn't the same person who had met him here months ago. I wasn't the same person who had let herself believe in words without actions, in potential without proof. I had learned. Love isn't a promise. It isn't a fairy tale. It isn't something that should leave you questioning your worth. Love should feel like certainty, like steadiness, like someone choosing you every single day, without hesitation, without excuses. And if it doesn't, then it isn't love at all. As I sat there sipping my coffee, I let the past settle. Not as a weight, not as something to regret, but as something to remember. Because every mistake, every wrong turn, every heartbreak, it had all led me here. To a place where I finally understood that I deserved better. That I didn't need to chase, to prove, to fight for a place in someone's life. The right person wouldn't make me. And when that person came along, I would know. Because this time, I wouldn't ignore the signs. I took one last sip, placed my cup down, and walked out into the afternoon sun. The world kept moving, just as it always had. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to move with it. Sometimes the hardest lessons come wrapped in the people we once thought we could trust. But every experience, good or bad, teaches us something about ourselves. About what we want, what we deserve, and what we should never settle for. If you've ever been in a situation like this, if you've ever found yourself holding on to someone who wasn't really there, know that you're not alone. We all have stories and lessons we've learned the hard way. And sometimes, sharing them is how we heal. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to walk away, even when it was difficult? What did it teach you? Feel free to share your story in the comments. Let's create a space where we can learn from each other, where no one feels like they have to go through these things alone. Thank you for being here, for listening, for allowing me to share this story with you. I hope it brought you something, understanding, comfort, maybe even clarity. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, the right people will never make you question your worth.